Well, good afternoon, students. This is Wednesday afternoon, April 15th. I'm sorry I did not get back to that. Or get to this sooner than now. I'm just presuming that you have read the article from from the New Catholic Encyclopedia on Gnosticism, which I have in your files. That you have viewed Tom Wright's, so he's called N.C. Wright in some cases, or N.T. Wright, I should say. Tom Wright's YouTube channel on Gnosticism, and also the What Did Gnostic Christians Believe, this Religion for Breakfast channel. I found those very interesting, enlightening, and I'm not going to get into those issues that they are. I just want to lay out 6 things that I believe that are important for what has happened in terms of the mainstream movement, which we call early Christianity, and what they came to believe because of this interaction and all the other things that were happening in the Roman Empire at the time of these first 3 to 4 centuries of early Christianity. First of all, the number one issue is, of course, incarnation. What these early Christians believed, these Gnostics were teaching, or at least some of them, was that this sort of heavenly revealer, Jesus, appeared to them as being human, and actually he was not, because a belief of at least certain Gnostics was that the spiritual never becomes material, because the material reality is evil in this sort of dualistic world. And so what the Christians are holding on to is Jesus did become flesh and become one with us and took on everything that we have of our own existence, including pain and suffering and so forth like that. And of course, if you've participated in the Easter Triduum, these 3 days of Good Friday, we recognize that Jesus himself took on that pain even on the cross. But he took on that, and the only thing he did not enjoy, experience inside of himself was sin. And that's the one thing that separates Jesus from us. And so he is this is a very compassionate view of Jesus, comes to us and understands everything about our human condition. And that's what these early Christians, or at least one of the reasons why the early Christians really wanted to keep this focus on Jesus did become flesh. The word become flesh, as it was talked about in the Gospel of John, that first chapter. Secondly, that salvation does not come from secret knowledge, but the knowledge that we get from reading the scriptures. And I'll come back to the scriptures in a moment. But what Tom Wright was emphasizing here is this is like an inner world redemption. This is, things are happening here in the world in which we live, the physical universe and stuff like this. And so our salvation comes from not this from sort of secret knowledge that we get from some sort of heavenly revealer, but it is of salvation comes from Jesus's saving words and deeds that we see manifested in the New Testament, and salvation comes through our participation in that. And as we've already talked about in terms of living out the gospel, this was, of course, taking on, as Jesus did, the role of a servant with one another, and especially to take care of the poor, the sick, the hungry, the imprisoned, and so forth. Read Matthew's Gospel, the 25th chapter, verses 31 to 46, and you see this spelled out of how we are as Christians are to take care of those people, what we would call generically the poor. Thirdly, what they're holding out here is, besides incarnation, salvation, but it's also this theme of resurrection. And this belief here is not simply the soul that is released from the body, but the resurrection means it is the body itself that is, as we were reflecting upon 1 Corinthians, that later part of that chapter of Paul, he's dealing with the reality of our own flesh and our own bodies and stuff like this. And so the belief, and especially we see this in the Middle Ages, personhood meant both the soul and the body, and the belief is that we are going to be, that's what we experience now, and we will experience that in the heavenly state, where not only will be a sort of a soul existence, but it's also be some sort of bodily existence. And so the body does matter here in terms of the resurrection and the holding on. And it's really a confirmation of the flesh in terms of Jesus taking on that flesh and basically sanctifying it with his resurrection. We're going to come back to this issue. The fourth issue here is of creation, that is, of the positive nature of it. Remember, in Genesis, the continual reference to creation as good. This is going to continue on. And so creation itself is not a manifestation of a demiurge, as sort of a false god, and the world itself is evil and so forth, and we need to escape from it. But creation itself is good. And therefore, and we'll see this, especially as reflect upon Francis of Assisi's Canticle of the Creatures, that it is, everything is good here, creation itself. This is not a manifestation of evil, but it is of goodness. And we can embrace creation that way. And I think this really does fit into the world of, into the environmental issues that we have today in terms of ecology and so forth. And we'll come back to that again. In terms of leadership, remember in 1 Corinthians verse 15 that Paul says, I himself am handing on to you what was passed on to me. And this is what we call the tradition. We call this the sort of what we call apostolic succession, and meaning that this tradition of these core teachings of Jesus are handed down by these authorities. And so it is not only about what you listen to, but it's basically who you're listening to. And so in the early church, they were really recognizing that it's about the authority figures, that this chain of transmission of these, of who these people are and how do they fit into the early Christian community, beginning with these first apostles and that passing on that information. So apostolic succession is brings us basically right teaching, and therefore it helps us to discern whether other teachers are telling us what is true or false. The rule number 5 is, or number 6, I should say, is the rule of faith. And this is very important in the context of this, because this gives us the core teachings. This is what is called the kerygma, the core teachings, and especially what I want to emphasize here is the incarnation and the resurrection of Jesus as core teachings. And so that was, the core teachings was that. And so part of this, the rule of faith, was to have these formulas of belief. We saw these sort of formulas of belief in 1 Corinthians 15 when Paul says, I'm passing on to you what I have received, that actually that Jesus died, was buried, rose again, and appeared. Those 4 statements, as we've already talked about, are what we would call the kerygma, the core beliefs and stuff. And this is extended out to the incarnation and the resurrection of Jesus. And finally, there's the canon of Scripture. There, as you detected, if you watch those 2 other videos, there's a lot of text. In fact, there's more text floating around in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries that are coming out of Gnostic circles and other forms of circles and stuff like this. And basically, it's what do we read? The important thing is, what do we read to know that we are truly Christians? And they are really holding out what we mean the canon of Scripture basically is the ruler measure by which they determine those 27 writings, those 4 Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, all those letters that we have talked about, the book of Revelation. All of those things were determined to give us authentic teachings of Jesus, and gives us basically that kerygma, those core teachings of Jesus. And so those are the texts that we can rely on. And those are the ways that we can know how to steer through all the difficulties of in the early church, but also even today. How do we determine how we're supposed to do this? We first of all rely, of course, on the Scriptures. So these are the things that I want to emphasize today. The reaction to, in this Gnostic world, whether they're reacting to them directly or not. It is the incarnation, it is salvation, it is resurrection, it is creation, it is the apostolic succession, the rule of faith or kerygma, and also the canon of Scriptures. Those are the 6 issues that, actually the 7 issues that I wanted you to be aware of, and we will continue to discuss this. On Friday, we will move into the world of martyrdom. I will send you information about that, but I hope this is helpful for you to understand this early Christian experience in terms of in the Gnostic world, in the Roman world, and so forth. Blessings to all of you.